The judge's gavel didn't make a sound, but in my head, it was a gunshot. $890,000. That was the official price tag on my 3-year education in international marriage. I was 67 years old, sitting in a Texas courtroom, having just legally agreed to hand over more than half of everything I'd ever worked for to a woman 32 years my junior. She blew me a kiss as she walked out with her lawyer. The hardest part wasn't the money, not really. It was knowing that if I'm being honest with myself, I paid for every single brick in the wall she built around me. I handed her the mortar. I helped her lay the foundation. I was the general contractor on my own destruction. People will tell you stories like this are about being a fool, about being naive. But I wasn't naive. I'd run a successful business for 30 years, managed multi-million-dollar contracts, and looked 100 men in the eye, and known who was lying and who was telling the truth. But this was different. This wasn't a business deal, I told myself. This was love. And that belief, that single, simple belief, cost me more than a decade of my life's work. To understand how a man who prided himself on his judgment could end up in a place like this, how I went from a respected business owner in Fort Worth, Texas, to a cautionary tale in a rented apartment. You have to understand the silence. We have to go back 4 years, to an empty house that used to be full of life, and a loneliness that was so heavy, I would have done anything to make it stop. 4 years before I ever heard the name Elena, my life in Fort Worth wasn't just quiet. It was silent. The kind of silence that has a weight to it. My wife of 35 years, Mary, had been gone for 4 years, lost to a battle with cancer that took the sound out of our home. We had a true partnership. We raised 2 kids, built a life, and filled a house with noise and arguments and laughter. Then, suddenly, it was just me. Me and the echo. I was a widower, rattling around in a paid-off family home that felt more like a museum of a life I used to have. By any measure, I was a success story. I'd spent 30 years building a commercial contracting business from the ground up. Concrete and foundations. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. I wasn't a man who inherited anything. I started with a pickup truck and a willingness to work harder than the next guy. I ended up selling that business for enough to leave me with a brokerage account holding $1.2 million. With the house valued at $300,000, my net worth was a solid $1.5 million. I considered myself financially secure because I was financially prudent. I understood risk. In my world, you don't get to manage multi-million-dollar contracts by being a fool. You learn to read men. You learn to read the fine print, and I was good at it. But that skill set doesn't help you when the problem is a Saturday night that stretches into an eternity. My kids were grown, married, living in other states. They'd call, of course. "How are you doing, Dad?" But they had their own lives, their own noise. My life was making dinner for one. It was watching the game alone. It was the gut-wrenching feeling of being completely and utterly invisible. I tried dating locally. Women my age seemed to be auditioning a travel companion for their golden years, and younger women. Well, younger women looked right through me. The idea was planted by a younger guy I was consulting with. He was showing me pictures from a trip to Eastern Europe and said offhand, "The women there are just different, traditional, feminine." It was just a comment, but it stuck in my head. A few days later, another Saturday night rolled around. The silence in the house was so loud I couldn't stand it. It felt like a problem that needed a solution. My entire life, I had been a problem solver. A general contractor doesn't stare at a problem. He fixes it. So I sat down at my computer, and for the first time in my life, I typed international dating sites into the search bar. I wasn't looking for a fling. I was looking for what I had lost. I was looking for a way to fill the silence. That night, I signed up. That night, I started building the house that would eventually fall on top of me. The dating site was a blur of faces, all of them smiling, all of them promising something. I must have clicked through 100 profiles, and then I saw her. Elena, 32 years old, from a city I couldn't pronounce, Cluj-Napoca, Romania. She was an art history student. In her pictures, she wasn't posing on a beach or in a nightclub. She was in a library or standing next to an old church. There was a seriousness in her eyes that felt Real. Different. So I sent a message, and she wrote back. For the next 6 months, my life had a new rhythm. Every morning I woke up to a message from her. Every night we'd have a video call. The 12-hour time difference didn't matter. It was the first thing I looked forward to when I woke up, and the last thing I did before bed. The silence in the house was gone. It was filled with her voice. She'd listen, really listen, when I told her stories about the business, about projects I'd built 30 years ago. No one had listened to those stories in a long time. She'd look into the camera and call me, my king. A 64-year-old man from Texas being called a king by a beautiful woman half his age. It sounds ridiculous now, but at the time, it felt like I was finally being seen for everything I'd built, for the man I was. I felt strong again. Vital. About 3 months in, the first test came. We were on a call, and she seemed distracted, upset. She told me her laptop had died, right in the middle of her studies. It was old, she said. She couldn't afford a new one, and her final papers were due. I could see the panic in her face. And in that moment, the solution was so simple, so obvious. I was a problem solver. Here was a problem. $1,500. To me, it was nothing. I could spend that on a weekend fishing trip. To her, it was the difference between passing and failing. So I went to Western Union the next day and wired the money. The message I got back, it wasn't just thank you. It was a flood of gratitude, of awe. I hadn't just bought her a laptop. I had saved her. And that feeling of being her hero, it was intoxicating. It was worth 100 times what I sent. After 6 months, I knew I had to meet her. I booked a flight to Romania and a room in the best hotel in Cluj-Napoca. I was nervous, of course. What if it wasn't the same in person? But the moment I saw her at the airport, all of that disappeared. She was even more captivating than on the screen. For 10 days, she showed me her city, her world. And she introduced me to her mother, a quiet, stern-faced woman who looked at me with a calculating gaze I mistook for protective concern. Halfway through the trip, the second test, the mother had a sudden, severe toothache. An abscess, Elena said, frantic. The public clinic couldn't see her for weeks. She needed a private surgeon, immediately. The bill was $5,000. I didn't even think about it. I saw the fear in Elena's eyes, and my instinct, my entire life's training kicked in. You take care of your family. You provide. You protect. I paid the bill. And in that moment, I wasn't just Elena's American boyfriend. I was the patriarch, the provider, the man who could make problems go away. It felt right. It felt like the man I was always meant to be. Back in Fort Worth, the house felt even quieter, even emptier. I missed her constantly. I'd spent my whole life building foundations of concrete, and now I was going to build a new one, for us. I started the K-1 fiancé visa process. It was a mountain of paperwork, but I didn't care. I was bringing my future home. Then my son called. He's a good kid, a practical kid, an engineer. Dad, he said, and I could hear the worry in his voice. This is all happening really fast. You've only known her a few months. You've only met her once. Do you even know her? I felt a flash of anger. It felt like he was questioning my judgment. More than that, it felt like he was questioning her. I'm happy, I told him, my voice tight. For the first time in years, I'm actually happy. Isn't that enough? My lawyer was next, a man I'd worked with for 20 years. He slid a piece of paper across his desk. A prenuptial agreement. He said it was standard procedure, especially with my assets. I looked at the document, and it felt like an insult. An insult to me, an insult to Elena, insult. It was a legal document designed to plan for failure, and I was planning for a life. I pushed it back across the desk. I remember exactly what I said to him. That feels like planning for a fire while I'm standing in the rain. It's unromantic. It says I don't trust her. And I believe that. I truly believe that, to bring her to America, to ask her to be my wife, and then to hand her a document that said, just in case this doesn't work out, was the most cynical thing I could possibly do. It was a contradiction. My trust was the foundation we were building on, and I refused to put a crack in it before we even started. Elena arrived in Texas, and we were married in a small ceremony. The first few months were a dream. She was sweet, affectionate, and made my old house feel like a home again. But then, slowly, things started to shift. It began with the house. My family home, the one I'd paid off and lived in for 30 years, was suddenly too old, too far from the city. She wanted something that reflected our status. Her friends, new friends from the gated communities, had modern houses. I'd spent my life providing, and what's the point of success if you can't share it? So I caved. We found a house in a new development, $650,000. And to pay for it, I did the single most catastrophic thing I could have done. I moved money from my personal brokerage account, the money from the sale of my business, into a new joint account with her. And we bought the house, with both our names on the deed. In the eyes of the law, my 30 years of work had just become our money. Then it was a car. Her friends all had nice cars. I bought her a Lexus. Then her family in Romania needed help. I set up a monthly wire transfer. I was hemorrhaging money. But I told myself, this is what a husband does. This is what a successful man does. You build a kingdom for your queen. The change came exactly 2 years and 1 month after she arrived. The day her conditional green card was approved, and she became a permanent resident. It wasn't a slow fade. It was like a light switch being flipped. The affection vanished. The my king was gone, replaced by heavy sighs and complaints. She was always on her phone, pacing the house, speaking rapidly in Romanian, laughing with people I didn't know. The home I had bought for us suddenly felt like her hotel, and I was just a guest who was paying for everything. A pit grew in my stomach, that old familiar feeling a contractor gets when he knows a foundation is bad. The final straw came on a Tuesday night. She'd left her iPad on the kitchen counter. I picked it up to look up a score, and there it was. A string of messages with a man in Romania. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read. They called me Betrayal, the old man. They talked about the final phase of their plan. They talked about the payout. The messages went back years. The broken laptop, the mother's medical emergency. It was all there. A business plan. And I was the project. I confronted her that night, the iPad in my hand. I was shaking, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just stared at me with those same serious eyes I'd seen in her profile picture, completely empty of any emotion. And then she said the 5 words that brought my world crashing down. You should have gotten the prenup. The next morning, a man in a cheap suit knocked on my door and served me with divorce papers. When Elena stepped off the plane at DFW, it was like the world switched from black and white to color. The woman I'd spent 6 months talking to through a screen was finally here, in my arms. We were married a week later, just a simple ceremony at the courthouse. I wasn't looking for a big party. I was looking for the quiet joy of having a partner again. And for the first few months, that's exactly what I had. She filled my old house with a life it hadn't seen in years. She'd be in the kitchen, humming a song I didn't know, the smell of something cooking filling the halls. She'd put her hand on my arm while we watched TV. The silence was gone. For the first time since Mary passed, the house felt like a home, not a memory. But a new life, she argued gently, needed a new foundation. The house I'd lived in for 30 years, the one where I'd raised my kids, was a monument to my past, she said. Our future, our status, deserved something that belonged to both of us. It started with comments about how her new friends, women from the local country club she'd joined, lived in these bright modern homes in the new developments north of the city. My house was too old, she'd say, with a soft, apologetic smile. Too full of ghosts. And I looked around, and for the first time, I saw what she saw. It wasn't my home. It was a museum of a life that was over. A man who builds things for a living doesn't live in a museum. He builds something new. So we went looking, We found a sprawling $650,000 house in a gated community with a big open kitchen and a pool. To pay for it, I made the single most critical mistake of my life, but at the time, it felt like the ultimate gesture of trust. I moved a huge chunk of my retirement money, the money from selling my business, into a new joint checking account. And from that account, we paid for the house. Both our names went on the deed. It felt right. It felt like I was telling her, "What's mine is yours." In my mind, I was building our fortress. In the eyes of the law, I had just handed over the keys to the armory. With the new house came a new lifestyle. The women in our new neighborhood all drove new European cars. My dependable Ford pickup, the one I'd had for years, suddenly looked out of place in our 3-car garage. Elena's friends all had a Lexus or a Mercedes, so I bought her a Lexus. It was another brick in the life we were building. Then came the calls from Romania. Her mother needed something. Her brother's business was struggling. It was never a demand, always a tearful story of hardship. And what was I going to do? I was the provider. I was her king. A king doesn't let his queen's family struggle. I set up a monthly wire transfer to her mother. It was another bill, another expense chipping away at the nest egg I'd spent 30 years building. But every time I sent the money, Elena would look at me with that same look of awe I saw when I bought her that first laptop. I wasn't just her husband. I was her hero. I was solving problems. That's what I do. I was hemorrhaging cash, thousands of dollars a month. But I told myself that this was the cost of happiness. This is what a successful man does. You don't just build a house for your queen. You build her a kingdom. And you don't question the cost. The exact moment the dream died has a date on it. It was 2 years and 1 month after she stepped off that plane. It was the week her conditional green card was approved, making her a permanent resident of the United States. And it wasn't a slow fade into disappointment. It was like a circuit breaker tripping in the house. One day the lights were on. The next, darkness. The woman who called me my king, who would look at me with that wide-eyed gratitude, was just gone. She was replaced by a stranger who lived in my house. The easy affection, the hand on my arm, the morning smiles, they vanished. They were replaced by heavy sighs and the constant clicking tap of her manicured nails on her phone screen. The house had never felt bigger or emptier, not even in the years after Mary died, because that was a natural silence. This was a hostile one. I'd walk into a room, and she'd be on the phone, pacing back and forth by the pool, speaking rapid-fire Romanian, punctuated by sharp bursts of laughter with someone a world away. If I got close, the call would end abruptly, or she'd just turn her back to me, lowering her voice, making it clear that I was an intruder in her conversation. I was no longer the king of the kingdom I had built. I was the groundskeeper, the guy who paid the bills. The home I had bought for us now felt like her private hotel, and I was just a long-term guest whose credit card was still on file. A pit started to grow in my stomach, a cold, heavy knot that I knew all too well. It's the same feeling a contractor gets when he walks onto a job site and sees a hairline crack in a brand new foundation. You can try to ignore it. You can try to patch it over. But deep down, you know the whole structure is compromised. You know it's just a matter of time before it all comes down. I tried to talk to her. I tried to be the problem solver. "Elena, what's wrong?" I'd ask. "Are you unhappy? Did I do something?" And I'd get a blank stare, a shrug. "I'm just tired," she'd say, before turning back to her phone. It was like talking to a brick wall. I was trying to fix a problem with a person who didn't want it fixed. My generosity, the very thing that I believed was the expression of my love, was now just an expectation. The monthly wire transfers to her family. If I was a day late, I'd get a cold reminder. The Lexus, it needed a new set of tires. The house, the property taxes were due. I was no longer a provider. I was a bank, and I was beginning to feel like I'd been approved for a loan I could never pay off. The final straw came on a Tuesday night. It was late, after 11. She was upstairs, asleep. I was watching the end of some game, not even paying attention. I'd left her iPad on the kitchen counter earlier after she'd asked me to look up a recipe. I picked it up to check a score I'd missed. The screen lit up, and there it was, a string of messages. A chat window open with a man's name I didn't recognize. The messages were in Romanian, but even on the lock screen preview, I could see one word that made the blood freeze in my veins. Betrayal. I knew that word. She'd used it once, laughing, telling me it meant old man, like a term of endearment. But the context here didn't feel endearing. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I unlocked the iPad. It didn't even have a passcode. Why would it? The king of the castle doesn't expect treason in his own throne room. I opened the translation app on my phone, and with shaking hands I started pointing my camera at the screen. And I read. I read for an hour. It was all there. Years of it. The whole thing, laid out like a business plan. They called me the target. They talked about the investment phase, the first 6 months of video calls. They detailed the initial capital expenditures, the $1,500 laptop, the $5,000 dental emergency for a mother who probably had perfect teeth. It was all there, a meticulous ledger of my own destruction. They talked about the final phase, which was triggered by the permanent green card. And then I saw it, the message that sucked all the air out of my lungs. A message from him to her, from just a few weeks ago. The payout should be good, it said. Stick to the plan. He's an emotional old man. He'll fold. I stood there in the silent kitchen, the one she wanted, in the house I bought, and I felt the floor give way beneath me. I wasn't a husband. I wasn't a partner. I was a project. The most successful project of her life. I walked upstairs, the iPad in my hand. I was shaking so hard I could barely walk straight. I stood by the bed and said her name. She opened her eyes, annoyed at being woken up, and then she saw the iPad in my hand, the screen still glowing. For a split second, I saw a flash of something in her eyes. Panic. But it was gone as fast as it came. It was replaced by a cold, flat calm, the look of a professional whose job just got complicated. "What is this?" I asked. My voice was a whisper. I held up the iPad. She sat up in bed, looked at the screen, and then looked back at me. She didn't cry. She didn't deny it. She didn't yell. She just stared at me with those same serious eyes I'd seen in her dating profile picture, the eyes I thought looked so real, so different. And they were completely, utterly empty. No love, no remorse, nothing. It was the look a poker player gives you when they know they have a winning hand. And then she said the 5 words that brought my entire world crashing down around me. She said, "You should have gotten the prenup." The next morning, I was drinking coffee at the kitchen counter, trying to figure out what a man does when his life burns to the ground, when the doorbell rang. It was a man in a cheap suit, holding an envelope. He asked if I was Gary Thompson. I nodded. He handed me the envelope. I didn't even have to open it. I knew what it was. I had been served with divorce papers. The final phase of the plan was now officially in motion. So here I am, 68 years old. I'm living in a modest 2-bedroom apartment a few miles from the old neighborhood. It's clean. It's quiet. It's fine. After the divorce, we had to sell the house. That $650,000 fortress I was so proud of. The court, enforcing Texas community property law, looked at the money I'd moved into that joint account and called it marital property. My life's work. The final settlement came to $890,000. It was a hit. A big one. It didn't wipe me out, but it knocked me down hard. I'm not destroyed, but I'm damaged. I'm emotionally shattered, but I'm rebuilding. And from where I'm standing now, I can see every single mistake I made with perfect 20/20 hindsight. And I want to tell you directly what I learned, so you don't have to learn it the hard way. First, let's talk about money, because that's what this was really about. That money from my business, the money I'd earned over 30 years of work, before I even knew her name. The moment I moved $1 of it into our new joint account to buy that house, it wasn't my money anymore. Legally, it became our money. Never, ever commingle your premarital assets. It's the cleanest, fastest way to lose half of everything you've ever worked for. A prenuptial agreement isn't an insult. It's a firewall. It's a business document for what is, in the end, a business decision. And bringing someone into your country and your life is the biggest business decision you will ever make. Second, you have to understand what you're really paying for. She never loved me. She loved my bank account. I wasn't her king. I was a project she was managing, and every payment I made was just another milestone passed. If a woman you barely know is asking you for money, for a $1,500 laptop, for her mother's $5,000 teeth, for anything, it is not a test of your love. It is an audition. And you are auditioning for the part of the fool. Your generosity won't make her love you. It just proves to her that the plan is working and that you're the right man for the job. Third, and this is the hardest one, because it's about ego. Listen. Just listen. My kids saw it. My son called me, worried sick, and I brushed him off because I didn't want him to burst my bubble. My lawyer, a man I'd trusted with my business for 20 years, saw it. He slid that prenup across the desk and I pushed it right back. Hell, deep down, a part of me saw it too. But I wanted the fairy tale more than I wanted the truth. If the people who have loved you your whole life, who have nothing to gain from your happiness but your happiness itself, are telling you to slow down, they're not jealous. They're scared for you. And they are probably right. Look, my story isn't about telling you not to look for love, here or overseas. It's about telling you to go into it with your eyes wide open, not your wallet. The lesson isn't don't trust, it's verify. Especially if you're a man in my position, nearing retirement, with a nest egg you worked your whole life for, you have a target on your back. Before you send that first dollar, before you talk to a single lawyer about a visa, you have to treat it like the biggest business deal of your life. Get the contract, get the prenup, and never, ever let your hope deafen you to the sound of a red flag. If this story can stop one other person from sitting where I sat in that courtroom, then it was worth telling. Click the link in the description below, where we've put together a checklist of the non-negotiable legal steps every man should take before considering an international marriage.